Hey, Kristen. What's up?
Yeah, I'm okay so far.
Good. Good morning. Uh,
Good morning.
you saw the title this morning. This title, U.S. Iran. What's the deal? So I'd like to talk
Yeah,
about, the deal. What's the deal? Is this the real deal? What do
of
you say?
course, of course. I think everybody's sitting on edge, waiting. I'm sure in Israel, everybody's in a lot of trepidation about what's going to happen. I'm sure that there's potentially many Israelis that are looking at this and concerned on. But at the same time, um, maybe there are those that are wanting a deal. Maybe you can discuss that on from how the feeling is there, the sentiment. But I think that what I understand is that probably people are wanting rather to get to the to the completion of this, to see Iran not having the ability for nuclear weapons, to not be able to fire missiles, and certainly not to pose a threat, definitely to Israel and the rest of the world.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about it. I'd like to read to you. I know that there, all over the news, there are many versions of the agreement. But let me read what I have, okay? And maybe then you will tell me what you have if there is a difference. So I will go to the agreement. Yeah, I'm reading from, okay, the United States and Iran are on the verge of a potential breakthrough to end their 3-month-old war. US President Donald Trump announced that a memorandum of understanding, MOU, for peace is, quote, largely negotiated, end quote, while Iranian state media cautions that major gaps remain and calls his claims, quote, incomplete. So the core details of the draft are the Strait of Hormuz reopening. Iran would clear its developed mines and reopen the critical waterway to global oil and gas shipping without charging tolls. Lifting blockades, the U.S. would end its naval blockade of Iranian ports. Sanctions relief, the U.S. would lift specific energy sanctions to allow Iran to freely sell oil again. Regional ceasefire, the deal calls for a halt to fighting on all fronts, including an end to the conflict between Israel and the Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah. And troop presence. The U.S. forces deployed to the region would remain in place during the 60-day extension, withdrawing only after a permanent deal is signed. So, what do you say?
Well, let's start from the tail end of that. They said that the forces would remain in the area until an agreement is signed and sort of everything goes back to status quo. And I think this is important to ask, what is the status quo? What happens after that? Because we know that Iran is certainly not going to lay down their weapons. They're not going to become peaceful. And how does that look? Nothing has changed. You've had an exchange, a battle, so to say, and there isn't a resolution. So I
If you
don't know
ask
where you.
me, there is a resolution. There is, but let's move forward because I'd like to go on and read. There is the friction, that we said that they're saying that even now, I'm reading the news online here in Israel, they're saying that there is still a conflict on one or two clauses in the agreement. Now, what about the nuclear issue? That's a problem. That's a major problem. That's a major threat. Waterway control, while they were agreeing to clear the shipping lanes, the Iranian state media explicitly stated on Sunday that Tehran will retain ultimate sovereignty and control over the Strait of Hormuz and domestic pushback. So the way I see it, if you ask me, it's a bad agreement. Bad agreement because the person or the entity, okay, that will gain from it, it's only Iran, not Israel, not the US.
It seems to be that way. It definitely seems to be that way. That the only benefactor from the deal is Iran. like you said, they maintain the control of the strait, which means they maintain leverage over the global oil, at least 20% of it. And again, will there be sunset clauses like you had in the JCPOA? Will you have 10-year, 15-year, 20-year sunset clauses that include for the nuclear issues, and then also for the delivery systems, the ballistic missiles? I don't know, how do the rest of the people see it? Or maybe some Americans can weigh in later and let us know what they think about it. But certainly it seems to be a really bad deal.
It is a bad deal, and there's something, I think, worse right now than the nuclear is, like you said, the Strait of Hormuz. If they get to keep it, to open it, okay, let's say they don't charge tolls, but this it can change once they have full control, once it's opened, and the sanctions that are going to be lifted. You have to ask yourself, okay, why now? I mean, why didn't President Trump attack? Because he said he was bringing Iran to the Stone Age, if I recall correctly. That those were his words, the Stone Age. You have to understand there is an election coming, right? The midterm election in the States. And my guess, Trump wants in every state to be a Republican candidate winning. So this is a very problematic times, because if he started another, 60-day operation / war, so he will lose the midterm election in every state, and that's a problem. That's the way I see it.
I think you're correct in seeing it that way, because he needs to bring sort of stability to the oil markets. And you touched on something. Even though they own, or they maintain sovereignty over the strait itself, you don't think that the shipping companies themselves, understanding that all it takes is one drone, or the drones are an issue, or even these speedboats that they have to threaten, they could send them out at any given time. So the way I see it is, it's very difficult to stabilize that situation, because the shipping companies will obviously take that into account, and all they do is they'll add their costs of that risk, because they'll obviously do risk mitigation, and that's in terms of financial issues. So I don't see things getting necessarily cheaper, but certainly maybe he levels the market off and stabilizes it with the midterm coming up. And it brings the Americans some kind of satisfaction that there's a resolution, everything is going to be fine. And a political move, maybe it's the right thing for him to do at this stage politically, but I don't believe it's the right move long term with regard to finding a resolution on the Iran issue for the world.
Yes, remember the agreement that Muhammad made. Remember
with the
year
Hudaybiyah.
Yes, in year 628, also Arafat, that he said to the Pakistanians, remember Hudaybiyah. This is basically, it's a lie. So it's not a ceasefire, because like we say in Israel, after the cease there is a fire. Marco Rubio just said something on the news, quote, it says the idea that the president would agree to deal that would put Iran in a stronger position regarding its nuclear ambition is absurd. It simply won't happen. What do you think? What do you think about Rubio?
I think Rubio is a brilliant man. I think he stands the best chances at being the next US president. He certainly has the support. He's an outstanding person, but I think he's also playing the political card at the moment. Sure, America is able to bring to bear the full might of the United States military, and they can certainly damage Iran tremendously. But I think it's a little bit short-sighted at this stage to say that the issue's been resolved and that they can go forward and it's no longer going to pose a threat to any kind. I think for the interim, it doesn't pose the threat so long as America maintains the pressure. But it will be good to see that. It will be good to see Marco Rubio or higher up, maybe Trump, actually state, that should Iran try to make any moves, that they will immediately launch a new operation against them, because I don't think the agreement is explicit about that at this stage. I think they're still basically ironing out the finer points.
I'd like to talk about the point that the Iranians want, complete ceasefire also in its proxies in Lebanon.
Huge issue for Israel. You would know this firsthand. How do you deal with this?
Even as we speak, yesterday, the day before, there are missiles and drones coming to the north of Israel. The people there, the students, haven't returned to school as normal. So
have the residents returned on? The residents that were moved from their homes and their homes were destroyed?
Very few. They're very angry there, and I think they should be, because why bringing the issue of proxies, to that agreement?
I totally agree that it should have been.
This agreement is between Iran and the States, nothing to do with Israel. We have the right to exist. We have the right to defend ourselves. So this agreement is not going to hold. It's not going to last. That's the way I see it. It's just basically a bluff. And I pray to God that Trump knows who he's been dealing with, because I love President Trump. He's the best president ever. But he needs to know what Islam is. Apparently he doesn't. Or he's playing a game. I don't know.
Totally in agreement with you. But again, like I said, if we have to look at potentially what the larger geopolitics are here, is he also maybe trying to potentially buy some time, like you said, for the midterms? And then also, is it also a calculation because of existing issues with China and Taiwan? We had a recent visit there as well, where the Chinese basically made him affirm that America's position on Taiwan was made clear. And then you have the Cuban issue coming up as well. So you wonder to yourself if this is just, like you said, if this is to buy time or not. But I think it's dangerous. It's dangerous to buy time. I think that the Iran and the proxies are certainly making no time, wasting time in making sure that they can keep the pressure on. Like you mentioned, the missiles and the rockets that are being fired at Israel from the north. But even with Gaza's been standing for quite some time, and there doesn't seem to be some kind of a movement there as well. Even though I know that Israel is maintaining a very, very tight security situation there, but it's not being resolved, and it needs to be resolved. They need to, in my opinion, as long as the Gazans remain there, it becomes a major issue. Trump had the brilliant idea of basically deporting the Gazans, moving them out of the area, and for good reason, because it's not possible to stay in a war zone. It's not about Israel bombing. Israel is not bombing civilians, but the people themselves, the ordinances and the rockets and all of the explosives that Hamas themselves and the Gazans, there's other groups besides Hamas. There's something like 21 or 22 other factions, which they all have the explicit goal of destroying Israel, and they all work together when they try to achieve that goal. They saw that on October 7th, and the area is devastated, not because Israel bombed the area, but because those people turned Gaza into a battlefield and planted bombs under just about every school and every home. So there's still unexploded ordinances there. There's damage to the infrastructure, water, sewage, so on. It's just not a place that can sustain humanity or people, and it's certainly not the fault of Israel. So it's actually sad to see that the agreements don't sort of fix any of the issues. But I do agree with you that the proxy issue of Iran should have been a totally separate thing, because Israel has got an immediate problem to the north and to the south, also to the east, potentially with Jordan in the near term. And we need to see how they're going to. Certainly, they will break the agreement. I wonder, and I'll ask you this question. If, let's say, Hezbollah or one of these groups launch new missiles after the stated goal, like after the sort of ceasefire agreement, whatever comes into place, does the agreement stipulate that Israel then has the right to conduct warfare against them, to remove their threat completely, to secure and stabilize its borders and protect its civilian population? You know,
We
is there
will do
provision made
whatever
for
it
that?
takes to defend our citizens. And also, so let me answer you because you spoke about Gaza. Well, it's very close to me, that issue, because I live close to Gaza, 20 minutes drive, 5 minutes aerial time. Gaza is basically a terrorist nest. So those Hamulot, like you mentioned, those little organizations, they basically, they're all in it together. Like for somebody who is a foreigner, you think, oh, this is against one another. No, they have the same enemy. It's us. Okay, they have the common enemy. They chose it. They did it. Now, they were supposed, I think, a month ago, the Hamas, which I don't like to say Hamas because all the Gazans were in it, because you didn't see any one Gazan helping our hostages. Not one. So they were supposed to disarm a month ago, right? They didn't give their notice, nothing. So the way I see it, the border of peace that is here in Kiryat Gat, okay, that's a joke, failed completely, failed. The other day even, so we are having, like, there is yellow line in Gaza, so our soldiers are behind the yellow line, So the other day, a Gazan terrorist decided he wanted to cross the line, so he was shot dead. This is what they try to do. They actually try, as we speak, to test the boundaries. Now, in Lebanon, we took a few kilometers as a buffer zone, not to settle there, just, to have more space, so the southern Lebanese won't be able to fire from that area. Okay. So if I understand correctly, if I remember correctly, on one of the clauses, they wanted to let the Iranians, they put it in again, the Hezbollah and everything. They wanted for us to let the South Lebanese to come back to their homes, meaning throwing rockets and drones again at the people of Israel. So the whole thing is not good. Trump must understand that Iranian sees Israel as the little Satan. They see US as the big Satan. They all chant death to Israel, death to America. So if I look at the bigger picture, okay, because some people don't, and this is what, we're here for, to have, brainstorming, to do brainstorming. This war/operation, I call it war because it is a war, the Rising Line and then also the Roaring Line and also Epic Fury, exposes everything, all the players. It's not just Israel, Iran, US. Exposes China, exposes Russia, all the bad players that are together, also North Korea and also Turkey. So who is going to benefit from that agreement? All those countries that want America gone. China, Russia, Turkey as well. Turkey is the next threat after Iran, and North Korea.
Totally. The access that you're mentioning, I wish that a lot more Americans would understand this. There's a lot of Americans that don't know about institutions or access like the BRICS. And certainly there exists a push against the West. I mean, Russia has not been quiet about it. They've been very vocal. So has China. They've said that the America is no longer seen as a global world superpower, or at least they will soon fall off from that position. And it's all about the proxies. China and Russia have their proxy, Iran and North Korea and Qatar and a lot of these people. And then you have those people who have their own proxies. Like you mentioned, Iran has got the Hezbollah, they've got Gaza, they've got people in the West Bank, which is not the West Bank. It should never be called the West Bank.
Judea and Samaria.
Judea and Samaria, exactly. So, because it's obviously Israeli territory, and I wonder when Israel is actually going to also try to push that issue, because the Americans made a promise, if I'm not mistaken, I think even was under Mike Pompeo. They were looking to claim sovereignty over their own territory, So there's been a lot of news recently. I know you made a post, actually on your YouTube channel. You called Kaja Kallas out about this, because the European Union specifically used the terminology West Bank, and they were really saying they were going to boycott Israeli products that were coming out of that area. And it's not correct. It is Israeli territory, and it forms part of this whole access block.
Justin, I'd like to explain why Judea and Samaria.
Okay,
You have to
go ahead.
understand. Very, very important. This is why we're called Jews. There were 12 tribes of Judah, Judea, okay? And the people who came from that tribe, which also me and my family, okay? I was born here, by the way. They are called Jews because we came from the tribe of Judah. So if you take this from us, you take us, you take us. So those countries, and if I can, I know that the topic is about Iran, USA, what's the deal? Is this the real deal? I like the word, the wording, but those countries, European Union, if we touched on that issue, they will pay. West Europe is gone, completely gone. Trust me, I've been in those places. France is gone. UK is completely gone, unfortunately. Belgium, Norway, Sweden, they're gone forever. How I know that? Because the minute you let, the cult, Islam, the minute you give them a place in a key position, the country's gone. There is no other way. Even I think, when was that? What country? Switzerland. They say that, they have certain rules that people cannot vote, can do that, whatever, the immigrants. Once they become a majority, they bound to vote for somebody, a candidate who is a Muslim. That's the way life goes. So they need to understand that. So European Union, we know this Kaja Kallas, this joker, what she's about. Well, whoever curses us will be cursed. Let me put it this way.
I'm in total agreement with you. The reason why I actually brought that up was for that explicit reason, to say that, speaking about the access that is formed against the West, and is using its proxies, it's using the Hezbollah, it's using Iran, it's using all these proxy war machines against Israel and against the United States, against Europe. It's disgusting to see that Europe is taking the wrong side in this whole picture. So Europe is basically not prepared to help the United States in a much more broader sense, to help open the strait, to come and play its part in the region, and with NATO. And then also, like I said, their position on Israel, calling it, for instance, the West Bank, and like you explained and pointed out, that it is Judea and Samaria because it is the rightful homeland of the Jewish people. And it all comes together. That's the only reason why I brought this up, because they're not isolated issues. You have this axis that is anti-Western, and while the West should remain resolute and should start fighting against their adversaries in terms of protection, making sure their societies maintain their cultures, maintain their heritage, maintain their strength through their militaries, and protecting themselves, and also fighting together as an alliance to make sure that there's a unity and a bond between the alliance itself. and yet they basically abandoned Israel and they abandoned the US. And it's going to be interesting to see how Trump in the near term is going to deal with that, because it's definitely already started being dealt with. I mean, he moved the 5,000 troops out of Germany, and I know he repositioned or he moved new troops into Poland, but at the end of the day, what is Europe doing? Europe is not fighting the war with Iran or supporting Israel. Or, you know, what they worried about is making declarations about rightful Israeli territory and boycotting poor, hard-working people in Israel that are just trying to make a living. But having said that, is that it will be Europe that will pay the cost for it, because they're only going to hurt themselves through the boycotts. They miss out on all of the products from Israel, and Israel is certainly an absolute upcoming powerhouse, in terms of technology, in terms of innovation. So the West is going to lose out, not Israel, as far as I see it.
We're already winning. If you think about it, look at the euro, look at the dollar, the exchange rate. Our currency is really bigger, stronger than ever. Even in times of war, we're still here, we're still standing. Now, I want to talk about the Gulf countries, because Mr. Trump said the other day that he wanted to attack, but the Gulf country, he said certain countries, asked him not to do so. And when I read it, those were the same Gulf countries, right, that Iran hit, right? Qatar, UAE. Okay, there's a noise from here. Okay, so, and I'm asking deliberately the question, why do you think they didn't attack back?
Well, it's a very good point. And I think that, in my honest opinion, that they are trying to play the long game, because they all have the same faith or belief system. They are Muslim countries. And, I don't think that they want to necessarily see any one of their brothers in the alliance, or whatever you want to call it, sort of totally disappear. So it's a lot more talk than it is, but the bark is louder than the bite, so to say. They certainly didn't attack with any meaningful force. There were some strikes, I believe, that the UAE conducted, and I believe Saudi Arabia conducted some strikes, but I think they were token strikes. There was certainly nothing very meaningful in those strikes. And I think that this is maybe even at the advice or discretion of the United States, because the United States should be pressuring them. I'm not trying to put the blame on the United States in this regard, but I think that the United States was in the prime position to actually get them to make a stance, to make it clear which side of the field they're on. And they showed clearly that they were not prepared to make any kind of firm movement. There's this power play that exists between the United States, China, Russia for the global seat of power, the great power strategic competition. And they are fully aware of that. And it seems that they leaned a little bit towards the China-Russia axis, maybe through BRICS. But then when America started showing power and dominance, certainly against Iran, and bringing the military might into the region, you saw how they started becoming more open towards discussion with America. And then obviously with the war happening. But like you said, why didn't they make meaningful strikes? Why didn't they come and join the United States military in a significant way? And I think that the simple answer to that is that they all the same people. It's all fundamentally the same system. So I think I hope that answers it, but maybe there's somebody else has some other ideas, or maybe there's something I'm missing.
No, I think you're right. We have here some listeners. If they want to talk, they're willing to. They're welcome to ask for the mic. I want to talk about May 2025. Remember what happened on May 2025? 21st of May, to be precise.
I'll be honest with you, you're really putting me on the spot with that question. I think that maybe you could just elaborate, please, on.
May 2025, President Trump, he came to visit the Middle East, remember? That big conference that everybody was there, Qataris and so-called Al-Jolani, that later described as a handsome man, but he's a terrorist in a suit. So that was a major, major time, because that was a big takia, if you know what I'm talking about. You know, they giving him the plane. Plane was a bribe. Okay? He doesn't need to have a plane. He's got a lot of money. States is a very wealthy nation. So they all prepared the ground for it. That's why, you know, he's not going to do anything against those Gulf countries. Plus, he has American bases there, which is a mistake, the way I see it. He should put everything in Israel here. By the way, we have Israeli IDF soldiers with Iron Dome in the UAE right now, protecting the UAE.
Well, that to me is what's even more surprising about this song, is that knowing that the Americans brought their THAAD batteries and other various systems, and then the Israelis also came and brought their significant systems to come and protect the UAE countries. You wonder to yourself why there hasn't been a real sort of outcry or something from the UAE, from Saudi Arabia, and from countries like this, when you certainly see all the protests that went on in the world. You know, the Free Fakistinian movement, and certainly even with the flotilla that was coming towards Israel now, that's just recently happened. You would expect, because Israeli batteries are literally protecting those countries' populations, that, you know, the most common decency would be, even if you weren't talking politics, but any decent person would understand that, you know, Israel is even doing something by protecting those people's civilians, while they have no problem allowing their own people to conduct warfare against Israel in terms of diplomacy and in terms of media and propaganda. I think Israel deserves a very great applause, to be honest, because they've done a lot. You know, they've certainly, with America's aid, you know, that even though there's no agreement, so to say, they've certainly dialed Iran back up to this point, from what I understand. And you know, without dragging it too long here, but the Iranians have to admit that they did experience damage. I mean, they're not in a good position. The currency is non-existent. They have water crisis in the country, and they're basically as dangerous as what they are, because they're not in a good position. And I think that America should push even harder because of that. They should hold their sort of, you know, as I say, strike the iron while it's hot. They should really be pushing for what suits the Americans and what suits the West, and not what suits the Iranians. At the end of the day, you heard in the agreement that Trump wanted to talk about sanctions relief there, for instance. I mean, that again, like we mentioned earlier, it's to the benefit of Iran. It's to help invigorate Iran's economy, but it comes at the discretion of America opening up the tap. So Uncle Sam has got his hand on the tap, and he has to open it. And it's crazy to see that Uncle Sam is prepared to open the tap without any sort of major concessions from Iran themselves.
I have a question. Why do they, or maybe, I don't know who voted, who chose Pakistan to be the mediator? Because I would not choose a Muslim country to be the mediator, because we know, like we did before, that, you know, everybody has a different agreement for some reason. The prior agreement, we talked about 10-point plan, or 15-point plan. Everybody was saying that he has a different agreement, both the Iranians and the Americans. So something is not okay there. The fact that the mediator was a Muslim country, something is not okay there. The fact that, the States doesn't have a lot to win here in this ceasefire deal. On the contrary, it's going to lose. So it's not okay. Now I'm reading from the news here. So the Iranian official was saying, quote, contrary to reports, we didn't agree to hand over highly enriched uranium. The nuclear issue is not part of the preliminary agreement. Why not? That should be number one. If they want to open the Strait of Hormuz, they've got to, eliminate all the nuclear, give the uranium, the enriched uranium, let us come there and take it.
If I can jump in there for 2 seconds.
Muslims. Yeah, Justin.
Sorry, I want to you mentioned something, and that was, I hope that they don't make the sort of the sticking points, the sanctions, the Strait of Hormuz, that they don't use that as the actual linchpin, that they remember that the actual issues, the core issue was the nuclear. Because what I'm seeing happening is that they're moving away from the core issue of the nuclear and the ballistic missiles and the proxies that Iran controls, and they're swinging the whole agenda to Hormuz. And they're saying that, for instance, if they open up Hormuz, then they will receive sanctions relief and this type of thing. And I think obviously the core issue is, surely it's not Hormuz. What is more dangerous than Hormuz? And really, I don't think it's a long-term issue either. It's, Iran was very, very close to attaining nuclear weapons. So I think it's even more deadly than what Hormuz is, even though the global oil industry suffers. But certainly the nuclear issue, I mean, that's a final issue. You can't walk back from that.
No, you can't. Yeah, so all these questions, needs to be addressed. How would you deal with it, Justin? What would you do?
Well, first of all, let me say, thank goodness I'm not the person in charge, because I think that the people dealing with it have got to have some real sleepless nights, and it's not easy. The things that they must take into consideration, economics and diplomacy and the countries. I mean, these are not light issues. How I would deal with it, I wouldn't have let the pressure off of Iran. I would have expected Trump to maybe have his Churchill moment and to go out and ask the American people for their approval for the operation to not just be an operation, but to be declared a war, because Iran certainly brought the war. 47 years ago, they made it clear by taking the hostages, the American hostages in the embassy, by the bombings, the countless lives that they took in Iraq and Afghanistan against US soldiers. So I expected America to do more. I think they should have declared the war. They should have spun up their economy in a wartime situation, asking for the approval of the American people, and then gone after Iran in a very, very serious and severe way. Not just removing one level of leadership like they've done now, because Iran has got multiple levels that they account for in instances like what happened. And you need to keep them. You need to keep them from being able to resurge, and the only way you can do that is continuous military action and support. There needed to be a broader call to the alliance in NATO, and maybe Trump could have even put more pressure on NATO than he has. The withdrawing of 5,000 troops was significant in some sense, but it certainly doesn't make NATO very I don't know, it doesn't bring too much action on their part. So as far as my answer, what I would do, like I mentioned, I think that it's just about pressure. I think the maximum pressure campaign that was happening in terms of sanctions and in terms of keeping Iran from starting anything, well, it has started, and now the maximum pressure has turned kinetic, and maximum pressure should remain kinetic with Iran. That's what I think.
I have a question for you before we sign off. Why do you think Trump didn't attack after he saw the Iranians on the bridge? If you remember, there were Iranians on the bridge.
I remember the Iranians on the bridge, and I also remember the call to the Iranian people to go out and have Nowruz, to celebrate their festival. But I think that the reason that he hasn't attacked yet can be twofold. One, there's maybe some considerations that are not in the public sphere for the public to basically understand at this point, that they may be having to deal with broader issues until they can potentially strike, maybe bringing a sort of more hardware into the region, maybe resting up some of their troops. Who knows what that entails? But I think that the reason why there hasn't been a strike, maybe there still will be. There potentially might still be. And I think that it would be silly for the Americans not to recognize that even in this, what we're discussing now between us, the agreement is not even an agreement. The talks happening now are the discussion about the discussion. And Iran is going to continue to do this. They're masters at doing this. America puts their agreement, Iran puts their agreement, or at least their talking points forward, and they disagree, and then they maybe iron out a few points, and it goes backwards and forwards. Iran says, we don't agree with these points, you don't agree with those points, and the discussion remains about the discussion. Now, whether Iran is doing this to simply wait the United States out, or wait President Trump's term out, or whether the United States is using this period of time to gather itself and to potentially set itself in a position for future strikes. Who knows? Who knows? I think at this stage we have to look at what's being done rather than what's being said. And I think that's going to be the key telltale sign in all of this.
I think that Trump, after seeing people on the bridge and the fact that they didn't go out and celebrated the Persian, okay, not Muslim, Persian festival of Hormuz, he realized something very important. That people, those Iranians in the diaspora, keep telling, oh, there's big propaganda, there are poor people there, they want Pahlavi, whatever. The fact is, ever since 1979, ever since the revolution, it's the second generation in Iran. Mind you, there was also Islam before 1979 in Iran. So now it's the second generation. So there are Muslims, most likely 98% Muslims in Iran. The civilians are with the regime itself. So he understood that. This is why he didn't attack. So that makes you wonder who lured him into this war. And now we're talking again about the other, players, China, Russia, North Korea. So he's trying to find a way out. This is the way I see it.
Certainly, there's definitely a risk of attrition that is set in. Iran has they have the capabilities They have a drone, they have these little speedboats, and yet America brings a huge force to bear. The aircraft carriers and so, and they can definitely control the situation. I do believe this, but it does have the attrition. And like you said, rightfully there is a disconnect. There's a major disconnect between what you hear coming out of Iran itself and then what you hear in the media, whether it's on the major news outlets or whether you're looking at YouTube or one of these other platforms, X, for instance, you hear the global cry for Iran just wants change, and Iran certainly wants to put Pahlavi in power. But what you see on the ground is a totally, like you mentioned, it's a totally different picture. You don't see this. You don't see people doing enough, if I can say. Certainly, I know that there's been a lot of people that were murdered, but I don't see a country that is ready for change. If anything, whenever I put the news on, I see a country that is still shouting death to America and death to Israel, and still making effigies and setting them on fire. And it doesn't look like it. It doesn't. You're right in saying it, Tom. I think a lot of people don't understand this. They don't see the disconnect. The slogans that have come out, like Free Iran, they've been very, very popular. They've certainly done their job. But in reality, the real reality about the actual change, meaningful change, it doesn't seem to match. It doesn't match the story. It doesn't match the propaganda, if I can say that.
Yeah, Iran, the Iranians inside Iran don't want to be free because, let's say, listen, they have a lot of crisis now. No water, okay, no electricity, okay? So when citizens don't have these things, these like bare necessities of life, okay, they go after, they rebel, they demonstrate, they do something. What did they do the last time there was no oil, or gas? They had a long trail, if you saw it, going to Pakistan to take it from there. So while they're being silenced, they say that they agree. I see Ariel here. Ariel, I'm giving you the mic. Hey. Justin, do you see him as a speaker?
Hey, shalom.
Ay, shalom. Shavuot tov.
Shavuot tov.
Yeah, so
Gamlach.
thank you. We're talking about Iran, US, Iran. What's the deal? So what do you think? Any
Sorry,
thoughts?
this lion was dreaming. This lion was sleeping on the job, and I just woke up. I'm so sorry. You guys are recording me. This is what a half awake, half asleep lion sounds like.
Well, you asked for the mic.
Only because I said absolutely yesterday when you said recorded spaces.
Okay,
No, I don't know.
thank you.
I can't keep up with the details with Iran. I mean, it's like there's so much. It's just like just get it done. We've been. It seems like dragging our feet or something. I don't know. I know we don't know all of the details, all the reports that the president of the United States gets and everything else. But when you look backwards in time and see how Israel's had to deal with other presidents and other cabinets or whatever, it's like we got to move the ball a little faster here. That's my opinion.
Yeah. So the way it is now, it's a very problematic agreement. Yes, listen, we can talk here as much as we want, but I think we'll soon find out. I understand that there is another extension of 60-day extension, so we'll find out.
I think so. And hey, Ariel, I think that it's again, it's more about what people see rather than what people hear. I think that people just need to keep watching and see how this plays out and unfolds. But I think it's important to give the United States and certainly to give Israel support, as much support as people who support them can. Understanding that there's a lot of issues that are not wrapped up here, and they still remain extremely dangerous. Like I know Ariel mentioned that that they need to speed the ball up, and I agree. I totally agree. It can't be left in this sort of state of limbo. And the Iranians shouldn't be given the upper hand in the agreements. If anything, they are on the weaker side, as far as I see it.
I'm sick of it. We should have never been negotiating anything. These people say they want to kill us. They won't give up the nuclear material. I don't know why the hell we're talking to anybody. I mean, the people can sit there and say, make excuses. Oh, well, we need to talk to somebody because there's going to be a regime. We're going to have to talk to somebody. I don't really care. Get the stuff, blow up everything you need to blow up, get the nuclear material, and then worry about who you're going to talk to. Because right now, you're talking to a bunch of terrorists that can't be trusted, and I'm sick of it.
Yeah, Riel, we discussed it before you woke up.
Are we having a prayer space later today at all, or?
Yes, we will.
Awesome.
Okay, so guys, thank you for listening. That's my first recorded space, right, Justin? So, yeah.
That's the first one I've spoken on with you on. So I hope it went well.
Well, thank
maybe
you.
next time.
I'd like, I'd like
time.
for those to come after and listen, because there's always like people maybe, they're asleep and they will listen to it, to really think about the questions that we, that we put. We raised the questions. So thank you. Ariel, go to sleep. Thanks, Justin. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Om. Thank you. Thank you.
See you later. Bye-bye.